very much. Thanks for joining us, everybody. So I'm Shawn Douglass, co-founder and CEO of Amberdata. We do institutional digital assets data. So going to moderate a panel today with some of the thought leaders in the industry. So the theme is how institutions look at on-chain data. So distilling data into actionable insights is complex, it's expensive, and requires deep subject matter expertise into what are the elements? So what are the elements that institutions are looking at, and why is it hard to get from on-chain data? So I'm going to hand it over to the panel, and they can introduce themselves. So David, you want to go first?
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is David Kroger. I work at Cowen Digital, and I lead the research team as a digital data scientist.
Sophia Lopez, founder of Kaleido, Web3 infrastructure company.
And Robert Materazzi at Lukka. We're a data management and data licensing company.
Awesome. So I think, Mike, we'll start with Robert over here. So we can just pass it down. So why do institutions need on-chain data? Like, what are the use cases, for what?
I'd say not all of them do yet. And it's a big misconception that all data is on-chain. A lot of, I'd say, newer institutions, when doing their initial research on adopting crypto or digital assets into their businesses, discover that very quickly that not all this data sits on-chain. It's in a lot of centralized databases, like in Coinbase's or any other centralized exchange out there. However, once DEXs increased or all the volume increased on DEXs a couple years ago pretty materially and spiked up, that created a lot of institutional investors that are also trading on those marketplaces and now require data from those sources. However, it's very unreliable and inconsistent for most of the public explorers and sources where people think that they can get it and rely from it. So there's a gap servicing institutions specifically when it comes to the on-chain data.
Got it. Sophia, how about you? What do you see from your institutional customers? What are they interested in? What do they need?
Yeah, well, I agree. It's important to mention there's a lot of reasons why data might be off-chain, depending on what people are building for certain application or use case. And it seems like some people are building homegrown tools as well versus using some more standard approaches in the marketplace. So still probably early days. We were talking earlier before the panel started. Some people, institutionals will still need that what is blockchain intro to even this topic. So you have people at different stages of maturity.
Got it. And David, you are a user of on-chain data. You're an institution. So what's your role and why do you care about on-chain data and kind of what are you looking at?
Yeah, so we are replicating the sell side for digital assets, so I'm going to preface it with that. But really, when I engage with institutions that are actively investing in digital assets, they have to often answer to board of directors or another key decision maker to figure out how are we going to get involved and why. And that why is really important. So the why is, why are we investing in, say, Bitcoin at 20,000 versus 30,000? And right now, kind of the solution as it currently sits are like DCF models that are rooted in on-chain transaction data. So like that's like one of the kind of core premises, but really modeling and being able to justify why you're getting involved is why on-chain data is really important to institutions.
Interesting. So the whole idea of crypto is there's this radical transparency that you can see the mechanisms, you can see the inputs, the outputs of smart contracts. Have you been able to turn that into actionable insights that let you parse a network, a protocol, what have you?
Yes, I mean, I have, and then lots of our clients have. It ranges from a variety of strategies, from figuring out what's in the mempool and getting ahead of that, to MEV strategies, all the way to understanding how things as arbitrary as like tokenomics and release schedules, how they affect the circulating supply and the price action that follows is what I've seen and discussed with our clients.
Awesome. So in the mempool is before it's committed into a transaction, and MEV is people trying to front run, back run, arbitrage, optimize, make sure blocks are full, what have you. So there's that before it happens. That's ephemeral. If you don't capture it while it's in flight, it's lost. So you've got to be able to capture that in flight. And then the token mechanisms, do you ever look at like cash flows, like the value that's being, how do you do your DCF model off of Uniswap type fees or something?
Yeah, it's
Leading the witness here, sorry.
well, it's a challenge because a lot of the data is hard to verify. There's obviously great data vendors that are actively building on top of it, but in comparison to things like equities, which was where my background is, it's still very early. So being able to look at 100+ chains and see all transactions and the revenue generated from each of the chains, and then putting it into a quarterly DCF model so that more traditional finance people understand it, is really a big hurdle. And on that front, I would just say that the Ethereum Foundation had put out a DCF model a few years back, which was actually pretty cutting edge for that time. But even since then, people still default back to that model, even though Ethereum's gone through the merge and a variety of other upgrades. And key performance indicators, or KPIs, have actually come to light as they would in equities, but in crypto. So that's been an important upgrade as well.
Okay. So Sophia, you've been doing this like 6 years, as long as me. It's insane, right? That we're all still
8 years.
8 years, right? So you are in a unique position where you see public on-chain data as well as private network, maybe CBDC data type stuff, like prototype. What things do your customers care about, or do you find interesting across both public chains and private chains that may be bridging to public chains or anything of the sort?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shawn. And we're reminiscing, we go way, way back in the industry, at least on the enterprise side. So yeah, Kaleido works across a range of industries. So as you mentioned, CBDCs and digital assets, all the way to industry verticals like insurance and healthcare, and then consumer, NFTs, and gaming. And you see, gaming networks now trying to understand the tokenomics, and they're building their own token economies. I mean, you asked about CBDCs. We just have been working I wrapped up a project with SWIFT with 18 central banks and global transaction banks, where for 5 months they're really trying to understand, how do these siloed ecosystems work in the new world, and what sort of transparency you can get around transactions, and really looking at a variety of early days, but every ecosystem is moving to basically digital money or CBDCs. What does that look like in the new world order? So I think one interesting thing we've seen just from enterprise adoption, working more broadly than just institutional, which is more of like assets and investments, but in the early days, people really, for GDPR and a variety of other reasons, there was data that needed to be off-chain, and then some on-chain data as well. Enterprises got a lot more comfortable with on-chain and public, and then we see the public space is moved towards more scaling, more performance, and providing application-specific chains. So Avalanche has subnets. So one of the reasons I'm here is, that's been a big interest to our clients, the whole application chain space, and we're announcing adding support for subnets. We think that's a critical part of the end-state infrastructure. It does lend itself, Shawn, to just questions of, how do you do, wallet-based sort of tracking of assets activities across multiple chains if some of those are going to be subnets, which may or may not be indexed. And then you want to look at, an asset that might, with fractionalization, how do you look at groups of assets and then get interesting insights? So I am reflecting, my last comment on the panel is that you mentioned this is meant to be very transparent and open, but there's been a huge asymmetry of understanding and how people can leverage the information, and that's all from smart contracts where you have hacks, or just finding alpha, which the panel is talking about. It's early days, so although the information is seemingly transparent and there is data and there's some great data vendors, there's still this early space in the market where people who really can understand it can get some great returns on it, and others could fall by the wayside, and then just issues with trusted parties. We were talking about FTX and the effect of that on this space as well since the fall. So
yeah, I think it's the information asymmetry. It's public, it's available, but creating that asymmetry is, I think, why we're all kind of in business.
Well, like the front running and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So Robert, Lukka's built an amazing business. You have people that bet their whole back-end infrastructure on you guys, from an accounting and from a tax and other business use cases. What's your what type of data are your institutional customers relying upon you for?
It's a ton of different data, different types, whether it's transaction data, pricing data, on-chain, off-chain, reference data, all the other, we add subnets to a protocol, that results in more data. So we spend a lot of time cleaning it and scrubbing it before we can actually put it into our products, and which is interesting because it's something that you don't really see unless there's something wrong, and then people will complain about it, right? But data is inherently very messy, and if it's not cleaned first, none of everything else that we just described will work, right? We can't process it for gain-loss computations if you're doing reports. We can't derive analytics. We can't do risk models or any of the other things if the underlying data. So the whole garbage in, garbage out metaphor is always top of mind at Lukka.
Yeah, I think that's a huge value prop, just the complexity of a data. Like, a blockchain network is a decentralized distributed network. It is a database. It is an application server. It is a tokenized, incentivized, gamified economy. And oh, by the way, it's all public and freely available, right? I mean, yeah, right. It's like Google built a massive business scraping public clear text web pages. This is exponentially more complex. So, with the blockchain data being public, and even though you can get the data, why is it so hard? And specifically, what do you have to do to extract insights and value and make it actionable? Maybe you can start, Robert.
Want me to start with that? Yeah, I mean, just for maybe anyone that's not familiar, blockchain data inherently is not very searchable. It's using cryptography, so it's actually designed to not be very searchable. And so when we do need to search off of it, because we need to access that information, typically you're indexing it. So that means you're storing it in a traditional database, and so that you can search off of it just like a search engine would work, or it's comparable. And but that index can be done to varying degrees of quality. And I know just a minute ago the previous speaker was talking about AICPA, SOC controls, perfect example of where a risk framework comes in handy when you're trying to index blockchain data so that the businesses that are using it can rely on the service provider behind it. But there's a lot of decisions that you get to make when you're indexing it. So ERC20 or the Ethereum protocol there's a lot of different data fields, or you pick Avalanche, any of these, there's a lot more than Bitcoin, which is a very simple protocol from a data perspective. And so most teams that are indexing these to make them available are making decisions to not record certain data elements in many cases. And otherwise it's just cost prohibitive. And so now if you're the user that's ingesting that data and it doesn't have all the fields you need, now you've got to go find it somewhere else, or maybe you have to build in-house, and there's thousands of companies making decisions like that all the time, and all the decisions are in different directions. So you get a lot of different inconsistent data across the providers.
So it's complex, it's inconsistent, you have to have the subject matter expertise to understand each protocol on each network, and there may be name collisions across those, and you have to be smart.
That's a separate assessment per protocol,
yeah.
right? They can vary in complexity vastly.
Sounds like a tremendous amount of work. Sophia, what's your perspective on it?
I do think for institutions looking for a trusted team, as Robert mentioned, there's hundreds of decisions that are being made as part of the indexing, and the space is evolving. Things are going to change. As I mentioned, there's other layers besides layer one as well that you might want to fold into a holistic view of the data. So I think really picking a good team and then having these sorts of discussions, and then knowing the space is going to evolve and change as you go forward. Maybe building some in-house expertise just with homegrown, just to better understand even what questions to ask. I'm sure David has some good thoughts on this topic.
I have lots of thoughts. So I do not do a lot of the data gathering from the blockchain. Our company typically goes out and engages with Amberdata, Lukka, the TIE, et cetera, and acquiring the data so that I can then do a lot of the model analysis and statistical running. What's interesting though is you run into complexities as far as things as simple as volume. You know, we had a discussion earlier about this, but effectively, when you're talking with another, like a fund manager, let's say, and I'm saying, yeah, there was 100 million in volume today, and they're saying, I see 1 billion in volume. It's something as simple as volume that you take for granted, and every other asset class throws a red flag for everyone, going like, why are we talking about two vastly different numbers, and what happened? And it often does come from, well, they're accounting for Chinese exchanges, or they took out wash trading, or what they identified as wash trading, whether that was by hand or via algo. So there's a ton of variance between the different data sets, and it's something as simple as like a taxonomy, where again you take it accounted for in normal asset classes. But like, if I want to talk about all L2s that exist, my bucket of L2s might look different than someone else's bucket of L2s that use a different data provider. So when I say L2s are up 10% week over week, they might say, no, it's only up 2% or down 5%. And now you already, again, are running into modeling problems, and even just talking about something as simple as, a taxonomy is complicated.
Price even is complicated, right? What's the price of Bitcoin right now?
Yeah.
Where? On what exchange? Do you mean, is it volume weighted or what have you? It's crazy. Like, get into circulating supply, etc. So David, what's the most exciting metric or data set that you're excited about when you look at, say, a DeFi protocol?
That's tough because I've spent a good amount of time recently looking at valuation frameworks. There's a lot of academic papers that explore valuation frameworks, as well as I mentioned DCF models. And of course, you can start taking TradFi things like machine learning models into the fray, although because there's data quality concerns just in general, or like data amount, I should actually say, is, if you got a chain that was spun up 2 years ago, you probably don't have enough data to be running ML regressions or anything of that nature. And so taking these kind of things and analyzing, saying like, okay, look, L1s do particularly well when on-chain transactions spike up, and that might be the key performance indicator. So then you can start to model out, okay, this is a leading indicator typically by a week, or you can start looking at time zones. That's something I've been recently exploring, showing, by an hourly basis, you can start to see some alpha in, well, when the US goes to sleep or North America goes to sleep, Europe starts trading, and then you see some fluctuation, and there's opportunity in that. Lastly, I would just say, coming from the equity side, I worked on the alternative data and intelligence team. A mouthful, certainly, but being able to like web scrape data and take in things that aren't necessarily on-chain, such as like app downloads for MetaMask might be an example, where you can start to see the relation to the actual analysis, but that isn't directly posted to on-chain is the other thing I'm exploring.
Yeah, interesting. So kind of a unification of off-chain and on-chain data to understand what's going on. Sophia, is there areas that are, I don't know how down the DeFi rabbit hole or on-chain data?
David is down the rat hole, or
Okay.
rabbit hole,
Okay.
or rat hole. I was thinking, I like the idea of looking at more traditional metrics as well, like even developer adoption or other standard metrics, because when you look at ecosystems, I'm going to call out Solana, where FTX, and there were all these DeFi projects on top, and then when you start pulling on the thread, there was some shenanigans with certain people who were just like stacking on innovation after innovation. It looked like there was a ton of activity in return there, but it really was a bit fabricated. So it's, you want that you can get good metrics on data that you think is clean, but if everything's a house of cards, so I think some reality testing, like you mentioned, David, is smart to do.
Awesome.
Especially in newer spaces where you think there's higher returns and they're really exciting, but maybe that's a little bit of a caution flag too, just to do a little extra homework.
Robert, how about you? What do you see that customers need, or maybe they should need, as critical insights into understanding what's happening from an on-chain activity?
Yeah, and usually we offer a lot of different products at Lukka, so data products directly. We also offer software, which really is just managing all of that data. And then we're a customer of data as well in order to make all of that work. And in doing it, one of the very first data sets that comes to mind is reference data. So all the how we're mapping all of the ticker symbols, making sure that they're consistent, that they're uniform, that we know when they've changed over time, because they've even just individual tickers at exchanges have changed countless times over the years, like BTC, XBT to BTC and so on. And so normalizing all of that, I mean, we've mapped over 750,000 spot assets, and about approaching 100,000 of those are fungible. And most companies don't even know that many assets are out there, and most of them don't matter yet, right? They're tiny in market cap and volume and every other metric. However, they exist in institutional portfolios. And so we do that because we support about 1,000 or so crypto funds today with either software or data products. And across all of that activity, if we're missing an asset, then we'll add it for that customer. It makes our product, a little bit more mature, and then all of our customers benefit, and we've ended up with that number. So that's before we've gotten to anything quantitative or tried downloading transactions or priced it or anything. It's just making sure it's all clean and uniform first, which solves a lot of the problems, like you said. But it's never ending. There's always a new problem to solve and another column or another data field that we need to add to that set.
Awesome.
And,
I'll throw in a bit too, because no one touched on it. But so, like at Amberdata, one of the things that we do is we give lenses into what's my participation in a protocol, in DeFi, in Aave, in Uniswap. What's my impermanent loss? And then we do a lens into what's the participation in a pool, because we're really heavily trading focused. And so, did somebody add liquidity? Did they remove liquidity? Did they do a flash loan? How does that input price? And then people capitalize on that opportunity or mitigate risk, right? So let's pull it back to Robert, and we'll work back this way. So can I just run my own node, or can I just use a graph node? Like, what makes this hard, and what makes it institutional rather than me running it in my garage?
Yeah, so it depends. If you're not technical, definitely no. Even if you are, and you're a business and you have a technology team, it's very easy to replicate a node, but it's not really usable after you do that. From there, now you need to index it, like the example that I said earlier, and that becomes immensely more complex. And it varies based on the protocol and everything. So that, honestly, seen very, very few providers. I mean, I know Amberdata provides node data, constantly challenged. We've been a customer of Amberdata for, I think, years now. And we also run our own nodes, though. So we're a very deep technical shop. But we still use other providers that are out there because we have to check our work. We have to support QA processes. You want to create redundancy wherever you can. So
how about, is there industry standards, to be a leader in digital assets data infrastructure, SOC 2, what's the bar?
Not specific to crypto yet.
Just best practices. You're not going to fall over, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of ISO standards which are known more globally. The AICPA, which is a U.S. standard setter, accounting standard setter, sets the AICPA SOC 1 and SOC 2, which cover different risk domains. But I mean, it's all the normal frameworks that businesses are used to hearing about when it comes to technology and operational risk.
So
the short answer.
It's pretty hard to be highly available, scalable, and correct.
It is, and right. I mean, even storing the data. If you're a bank, core banking systems usually don't store more than 4 digits on the right side of the decimal place, where Bitcoin requires 8, Ethereum 18. There's some other newer ones that require beyond that. So even just holding the data, you build an API and then you start doing it, and you're wondering why you're seeing a bunch of zeros. It's because the infrastructure that's holding it isn't made
Can't
for
drop decimals. Awesome. Sophia, how about you? I mean, you have a unique position where you're doing public and you do, private stuff for, all kinds of things. Like, what makes it hard to do what you do? It's not easy to replicate. You've been able to do this for 7 years, 8 years, however long you've been doing
it.
Well,
I mentioned 8 because I originally had been at IBM, and then we launched the first blockchain as a service, IBM platform there, and then 2 years later left to start Kaleido. Because we felt people needed a full stack of technologies. To your point about what's hard, so originally people got really excited about blockchain and thought we just can run a node and we're good to go. And that's maybe, at least across all enterprise use cases, really only 5% of the total solution. So indexing is just one example of something you need to do on top of that. But there's many other types of things you need for a full stack turnkey type solution. So we built Kaleido to provide that. And we certainly, just like Robert, ISO 27K, SOC 2 Type 2, I think anyone who's looking to work with a vendor should ask for the SOC reports and see exactly, what risks were identified, what controls are in place. That's super important on, the compliance side of it. But I think when people go down the rabbit hole, they just, pick up the open source and like, okay, it's all open, I can do this, and can run into a lot of issues. Obviously on the data side, you can hear from what Robert's saying, cleaning the data is not a trivial task. But, figuring all the other things from a broader lens across like enterprise use cases, or, over 100 countries are working with CBDCs. It's like, how do you transact? How do you interoperate? There's a lot of other layers of technology it's needed. If you build that from scratch, which was a Gen 1 way of building, you have situations like what happened in Australia with the Australian Stock Exchange. They just, around the time that FTX imploded, some of these projects came out of the woodwork with their write-offs because they look like rounding errors by comparison. But they took a $250 million write-off for, I think it was like a 7-year project trying to build on DAML from scratch, with just a lot of consulting hours. So it's, I think now in all areas of the industry, you can really use a much more product-led approach by people that this is what they do day in, day out, 24/7. And it's not really a time, it's the Gen 2 way of building and getting your data and doing things right, versus throwing tens of millions of dollars at consultants to just build a bespoke thing that's not even hearted, tested, and scalable, or compliant.
And most of the consultants don't know how to do it yet either.
And they leave.
Well, if it's a one-off, yeah.
How about you, David? Do you have a last point you want to make?
It seems really hard, which is why we buy it. I would just say that my only experience from that, outside of dabbling it personally, is that as a firm, we take from a variety of different vendors, and even just trying to synchronize and just double check, like company X saying A and company Y is saying B, and this checks out, is a challenge for us as far as like making sure everything makes sense with the rest of the space.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine the amount of work that you guys have had to put in, both of you. So
it's easy to compare against another person, but when you don't have anybody to compare it to, it's pretty complicated. So I think distilling it down is that getting actionable insights off of on-chain and then even market data to develop prices that are defensible is incredibly complex, and it's expensive, and we all spend hundreds of $1,000s a month in AWS. Maybe not you, but we do. To do this in a highly available, scalable way so people can build data-powered businesses on top of on-chain data and market data and what have you. We have like 2 minutes left. Does anybody want to ask a question in the audience? We have a pretty stellar lineup of experts here. Yes.
I've heard that there have been calls for the AI CPA to do nuanced standards, perhaps focused at indexing. Is that something that you've also heard, or that you're a part of, or that would you support?
Funny enough, history in 2017, we developed a risk and control framework for assessing actual blockchain protocols, and we donated it to the AI CPA back then. It still hasn't turned into an official framework at all. They're more focused on accounting standards and valuation topics, which is a whole other set of problems that applies to crypto assets as well. So I don't think they've gotten there, but I do think it is well needed, for sure. Or from any other standard setter, right? There can be multiple out there, but yeah, ACPA should definitely do it as well.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much.